Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this last breakfast session for 2025. It's been a good run this year. Really thrilled to have Paul Opdenbosch with us. He's another AAUT winner. So he's at the top of his teaching game. He is the 2024 citation winner for outstanding contributions to student learning, and he's got a very distinguished career at QUT. So thanks very much for being there, Paul. We really appreciate your time. Before I hand over to Paul, I'd like to acknowledge I'm hosting this session on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, the people of the Adelaide Plains, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. Also acknowledge the Kaurna people as traditional custodians of the Adelaide region, and their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna today. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands that you are joining us from today, and acknowledge uh, any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. So, over to you, Paul. I've given you co-hosting rights. I will stop sharing.
No trouble.
And over to you, Paul van Opdenbosch. Thank you very much for being there.
Thanks, Stuart. And morning, everyone. How's everyone going? Just give me 2 seconds here. Let's get this all turned on and shared, of course, the joys of Zoom. Okay. Hopefully we're all good. Everyone can see that.
Yep, no problems, Paul. Looks good.
Beautiful, thank you. I do want to state just at the start here, I do have a lot of video in this presentation. I know Zoom's maybe not the best for video from time to time as well, so I do just want to apologise if it's a bit choppy, some of the backgrounds as we go through here. So, but yes, I'm doing a little presentation today on this wonderful process I went through here at QUT, developing and building virtual production studios and embedding this in our creative arts education area here, or our school here itself. So I'll walk through a multitude of things, but I think the best place to start, and Stuart's given me a little introduction, so we don't have to cover all this, but this is me in a nutshell, I suppose. I've been at QUT for about 19 years now, I believe, and I also studied here before that, so I'm kind of the product of the system. My classic joke is they just started paying me, so I just hung around for a bit. But yeah, I was lucky enough to be here at the time, sort of a lot of technology change and a lot of change in sort of what the teaching is and what's going on in this place. So I was able to jump into a lot of these sort of new areas, and QUT gave me options to do that with technology and that sort of stuff as well. So for a while now, I've been leading our development of virtual production capabilities at QUT, and that's been a sort of unofficial title. It's been a thing that has emerged from me being in this space and developing the sort of resources and processes that I have. At heart, I'm effectively a technical animator and artist as well. So I come from this background where I have, real-time technologies, coding, artistic practice, animation especially, and this all sort of integrates into one. The thing about technical animators and artists, the subtext is, if we can use code to do it, we will. So that's kind of, a lot of this sort of bleeds into what I've got here. And, my sort of noted outcomes recently, AAU Citation and, the top teaching award here at QUT as well, which is what really started me down this path to AAUT Citation Awards as well. So I won't dwell on this too much because we'll get to the cool stuff. A little bit about sort of my teaching philosophy here, because I think that's very important in terms of what we are doing. Just realize this is all the way. There we go. So yeah, I basically approach any of my teaching from this sort of grounding purposes here in terms of I want to embed students in the learning process. I want them to become part of the learning process. And, it's all about their experiences inside the classroom, whatever that classroom might be, whether it's a chalk and talk sort of exercise or a hands-on workshop. And this sort of intertwines with what I do in research, which is a practice-led approach. So where the practice is itself a form of research and communication of that outcome as well. I think anyone who sort of works in these creative arts fields is quite familiar with this sort of methodology, but it basically means that, what I do is also research, and I try and intertwine this into my teaching practice. So the students get this experience of not only just making something, but that deep sort of understanding and evaluation and sort of experimentation with these new forms of practice and technology itself. So that's sort of me in a mini nutshell there. One thing, of course, we do have to talk about when I'm talking about virtual production is what is virtual production? I fully expect that there's people in this meeting here, in this presentation that know what this is and understand this, but virtual production is not just a single thing. There's lots of things that go on there. So it's good to sort of frame what I've been doing in virtual production. And also just note that pretty much all the video and images content that I'm showing in this presentation are from QUT here, are from student projects and sort of my work here as well. So you can see parts of our studio in the background here, but I'll press on because I'm concerned about time in this one because I tend to waffle on a bit. All right. So, where do we start with this? What virtual production is? Like any good sort of teacher, I start with the words of other people, of course. But realistically, virtual production, we're talking about the amalgamation of traditional and digital techniques into one space in a real-time sense. So we're looking at this idea of trying to achieve outcomes in real time using technology that allows us to have instantaneous sort of feedbacks here. Now, these are a couple early quotes about virtual production, and I think this is one of these things that virtual production is considered new and exciting, and it is, parts of it are, but the concepts of virtual production have been around for a long time. You can see one or two quotes in here, from 2015, 2014, over 10 years ago now, and these are really sort of foreshadowing what we're doing now in virtual production as well. I mean, we've got one here from Hazel Group, which is the concept of virtual production foresees the combining of key aspects of media production in real time, which is basically, let's do visual effects in real time here. So, we can all read these. I won't dwell on these for too much, but yeah, that's kind of where we started. But the thing I really want to point out here is that virtual production is not new. A lot of the stuff that we do currently in virtual production has a long legacy back into animation and film production, but it has been around for a long time. Yes, there's new components of it, and that's really what, drove some of the new developments that I achieved here at QUT as well. So to really hammer home this point is that we can even stretch back right to 1964 here. We've got old Disney here doing some effectively pseudo mocap, okay? This was a Waldo suit. It was a NASA invention. And at the time, Disney had to animate a collection of these animatronic robots. Well, not him, but his colleagues, the Imagineers there, had to animate a collection of these animatronic little robots, which you can see on the stage here, for the World's Fair that was coming up. And so there was a lot of them. And it was just not feasible to animate them all by hand or digital impulses. So having access to this sort of technology here, they went down the path of, can we effectively capture the motion of our performer and apply it to robots, effectively, little animatronic robots here. And so, there's a long sort of backstory of why he's got access to this, that sort of stuff. But effectively, this is motion capture, but it's motion capture in real time. As the performer would move the hands, move the upper body, the head, the animatronic robot would also move around with it. And so they could see the feedback mechanism going on stage. So performer would perform something, it will be effectively puppeting this robot out in front. And if they're happy with it, they record it to magnetic tape and play it back. Now, this is a very analog form of virtual production. This is before there was digital technologies itself. So, but what I'm getting at here is these concepts that we deal with in virtual production, this idea of seeing things in real time, having that immediacy and trying to streamline and get outcomes quicker stretches very far back beyond sort of digital technology. So my thing is that virtual production is not new, okay? It's been around for a while. There is just new forms of it. And this is the nature of virtual production, is that it is an ever-evolving field. Okay. So, to hammer home here, let's look at a couple of quotes that are effectively what virtual production currently is or what currently considered. And the big thing here that I've underlined is the augmentation or replacement of traditional visual effects or animation workflows. Now, virtual production is actually bigger than animation, bigger than filming. There's a whole world here that stretches into performance, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But predominantly, animation and visual effects has been the main focus of more recent virtual productions. And as noting here, around 2019, we had this sudden influx of virtual production. And that was really thanks to the notoriety of The Mandalorian using this new in-camera visual effects technique. Okay. The sort of virtual production that I've engaged with has been quite diverse, but predominantly really sits within performance capture, motion capture, and in-camera visual effects. So just to really cover what they are in a brief nutshell here. So this is a current version of the studio that we're running with. This is a VP Studio 2.0 here at QUT. We're about to hit version 3, which is another thing we'll talk about later on. But in-camera visual effects, the idea of this is, it's in the title. We do the visual effects within the camera lens. So inside our VP Studio here, we have a large-scale LED wall that's 4.5 meters high by about 10 meters wide. And we have a virtual reality background here, a virtual environment, which is inside of Unreal Engine. So it's all live, it's all dynamic and updates, and we can make changes to the lighting, the content, all live, and we see through the camera lens. This little blue box here is what we call the inner frustum, and this is what the camera is effectively seeing. Down the side screen here, we have this wonderful framing of Davo here. We have our virtual background, and he's doing his presentation and talking about how Queensland Museum can use virtual production here. We have a little control source here. This is one of my students, Ryvan, who's a magic guy at this. And yeah, so the idea of this is effectively what we would have done in green screen. Okay, we would have shot Davo here against green screen, composite the plate in post. What we can do with in-cam visual effects is we do this all in one single shot. So live in the studio, this feed here is obviously from our camera. We see the outcome. We can then adjust the lighting, the background, and get that shot right, 100% right, or near right, that we just need to do some color grading in post. So the idea of in-cam visual effects is effectively replacing green screen, virtual set extensions. That's what effectively in-cam visual effects is. There's some trickery that goes on technology-wise. We track a camera, which gives us a point of view, and when that camera moves, we end up with parallax occurring in the background, which tricks the mind eye to actually have depth in the space. Okay, so a very short run over of what in-cam visual effects is, but this is sort of the new flavor of VP, the next thing that's been occurring. And when I talk about the sort of process I went through to get here, we'll cover this in a bit more fashion. But the sort of key component here has been to achieve this outcome in studio. And this does a big change to what happens with content creators, directors, visual effects artists. It all now sort of happens in the studio now. And I do have some examples here just to show outcomes from the space. We kind of focus here on QT on getting outcomes in the moment, in the studio, and not really doing post-compositing work if we can help it. So this here is actually, I think, the third student project we shot inside our VP studio once it was set up in early 2022, I believe, 2021. Yeah, so all these shots are directly in studio from the camera lens. There's been some color grading and some minor compositing of ash over the top of the content there. Okay, so this is student work. This is one of our first big projects, one of the third-year projects. They wanted to recreate the feeling of being in a firestorm as part of a documentary series about the Phrygian spring fires up here in Queensland that almost wiped out our whole community here as well. So they followed the story of this one firefighter that almost lost his life in this firestorm trying to battle the blazes, but inherently trying to create, a safe environment for students to have the experience of film inside a firestorm is just not an option. So VP gave us this option. These students worked for about a week in the studio here. We had other students working for a bit longer, which we'll come back to. But this is to show you some of the early outcomes we were dealing with here, which are still visually beautiful. I think they're stunning little outcomes from this sort of engagement we're into. And this is just one production, of course, but predominantly I'm showing it so you guys can get an understanding of what in-camera visual effects can do, the outcomes that we can see in the camera lens and just from being inside the studio. I'll skip forward a bit here. We do have just multiple shots, but this was version 1 of our studio, which we'll come back to, of course, and you can just see what was going on in the space here, what those shots were looking like.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Now, of course, there's a lot here with in-camera visual effects, so we could spend the entire time unpacking, but interest of time, we'll move on. The other sort of aspect we deal with a lot in virtual production inside of our studio especially is this motion capture / performance capture invention. I think everyone's kind of aware of what motion capture is, the sort of translation of a human physicality and motion into a virtual character. We capture that data. This was an early sort of class I did in motion capture. You can see here, we've got Buddy here, who's actually one of our dance students at the time. Basically performing as this ogre here in sort of Unreal Engine. We've got some pseudo VCam happening inside of an iPad here from Jap, who's actually a past student of ours. He's a wonderful, wonderful filmmaker. He's actually gone on to make his own company now as well. I said an early version of our studio here, but this is motion capture itself that we're doing. Okay. Yes, there's been some performative angles here. We also have this thing called performance capture, which is more about bringing the entire performance of our actor, of a dancer, of an artist effectively into the space, into the virtual space here. So it's that translation of physical data and physical performance into the virtual space. This is just an example of showing some really easy facial capture you can do with iPhone into some metahumans, that sort of stuff. So we can get quite high fidelity capture of both body and face in the space here. So, we have motion capture, performance capture. And oh, I feel like I've missed a frame there. Yes, I have missed a frame there. No, I haven't missed a frame there. Sorry. There we go. Okay, so this is a bit more modern example of it, where we also include a virtual camera, a more updated site of virtual cam. This is one of my classes this semester in the current studio, where students are effectively acting out a version of Cheaters, but with werewolf and spaceship troopers and that sort of stuff. But this is just showing what motion capture and performance capture can be, and how fast and how close we can get to that final product inside of animation as well. Now, yes, creature capture is the other thing we kind of get into in that performance capture land. It's the harder part of motion capture, retargeting humans to other creatures, but it's all the part of that virtual production landscape of being able to achieve sort of animated outcomes very quickly, or at least, you know, a close to final version of them. Okay. All right, so, you know, that's kind of an overview of the different types of aspects we have inside of virtual production. I have already touched on this briefly, but a key component of virtual production is the idea of being in the moment, being able to capture things and see the outcomes instantaneously. And this is kind of what virtual production is now. We are looking at how can we get the final product in the studio in both the in-cam visual effects, both the filmic form, but also the animated character form. Now, the animated character form is inherently a lot more difficult to get final product, and it's sort of the new area, and that's kind of where my research is sitting currently, is inside this idea of let's film animation over, capture it and edit it in post, just like we do with in-cam visual effects. But it has set up this new goal, especially in filmmaking, of this idea of final pixel on set. So final pixel is a visual effects term that basically means here's the final outcome from our visual effects shot. We want to do that in set in the camera lens. So pretty much all the sort of teaching we do is focused on that aspect of let's get the final product in studio and very little post. So, all right, so that's kind of setting the scene of what virtual production is. I hope that wasn't too rapid fire. Obviously, in the question time, we can go through and ask some more questions and explain that further if we need to. But that's effectively been the two focused areas I have been sort of spending my time on at QUT here itself. So for a while of trying to think out how do I cover this practice, this process I went through to develop virtual production at QUT here, develop the capabilities, let alone the hardware and the resources that we needed. And I really kind of, how do I communicate this was my question I was asking. And I found the easiest way to do this is actually to step right back and kind of give a bit of a historical, where did this start and where did we end up through. So, you know, it's not a, this is my life sort of story, but this has been my life for a while. But I think the grounding that it comes from to develop these sort of resources is a vital thing. And I often get asked like, oh, how do you do it? What do you need to have in place? And, you know, now it's a lot easier. You can develop VP content and VP capabilities a lot easier now because there has been a lot more development occurring, of course. So there's a lot more how-to guides, there's a lot more support. Some of the problems have been solved. But the early days is one of these things that is very sort of interesting because there's not a lot of people doing this development, and there was really no roadmap or how-to guide. There was lots of sort of trial and error experimentation and just filling out. So that sort of background where we started in this space is quite vital. So that's sort of, I'll kind of go through now is just this process developing virtual production at QUT. And you've already seen some of where we got to, but we'll step through it. So for me, this whole jumping into the VP space really started back in 2012 when I was doing my master's here at QUT. And I'd been teaching at QUT for a while at this point, and I was looking for something to really sink my technical skills into, but also have this beautiful creative outcome as well. And I was presented with this opportunity to work with Elise May here, who was at the time Expressions dance lead dancer, very talented, international renowned dancer, who was also doing her master's here at QUT. And just by happenstance, the film and animation department here at QUT bought our first motion capture system, which was an XSense inertia-based motion capture system. And so this was 2012. And so this gave me the ability to explore what motion capture was and really start to use that in my research purposes, but also use it for teaching and learning as well. And so that was really the starting point of this. I've been looking for something that sort of suits my technical needs, and being on staff at this point teaching VP in a casual sense, I was just a casual staff member at this point, I was afforded access to the system, and I was the first person to take out the box, set it up. And I mean, you can see Elise moving around here. This is the first test. We were doing sort of like, how far can this work? How does this work? Because being an inertia-based motion capture system, it's very different than the optical sort of side of things as well. Very quickly, in 2014, we actually went on and purchased our first optical-based mocap system. They just capture data differently. My God, I didn't realize I'm in this video. I'm very young there. But anyway, so we went down this path again, an optical-based capture system, which gives ability to capture other things bar human beings and a different sort of experience here. So, at this point, I'd started to embed this sort of use of motion capture into teaching, into workshops for students, and was lucky enough to do this little experiment here with Sean Goby, who I actually studied with a while ago, for him to make a short film, basically. So we were working, at this point, he was an external client, had our students come in, and we were working on how to use motion capture to make short film content inside of a game engine at this point as well. But this is really the starting point. Having a background with programming and IT and that technical influence really led me into this as being a really interesting thing. And I was effectively being a technical animator at the time without knowing that that was a thing. The concept of a technical animator really only started to get traction around 2017, 2018, before it was the thing. But this suited me perfectly. I would be using code or using technology to solve my animated outcomes. And so, yeah, that's kind of where it started with that. So we progressed after that. We were lucky enough from a research infrastructure grant that we were able to purchase our Vicon system, which gave us other capabilities at the time. So Vicon's a very advanced sort of motion capture system. And this was an early version of the new cameras that they were just released. Actually had to sign an NDA when we were talking about the cameras originally, which were highly accurate cameras, gave us lots of fidelity. But the important thing about this time was we started having the capability to stream from Blade at the time, which is the capture system, retarget it live into Unreal Engine here. You can see down the bottom here, all live inside the studio. And so this was pretty early days and not a lot going on in this space at the time, but it started us down this path, and especially me down this path of like, wow, we can do this live and in real time. So this was a wonderful sort of outcome. And it's one of these things where the reason I was able to jump into the VP space in QT, able to jump into VP, the current version of VP so quickly, is because we had a lot of this technology already. We had this sort of experience of setting up this live capture and retargeting sense here. And it was quite wonderful. These are acting students doing an acting workshop on how to embody creatures and characters. We actually did versions of Macbeth as zombies and robots. It was quite interesting. I do want to shout out Trent Bow up here, who at the time was one of my students, but then became one of our PhD students. And he was really quite pivotal in working out a lot of this technology with me in this space here. 2017, 2018, we were doing lots of mocap. We got up to this point where we're starting to do this live retargeting. We did a lot of abstract stuff as well. So I did a lot of work with dancers and still do a lot of work with dance here at QUT, where, interacting with virtual forms in a physical sense, but also a virtual sense, and what this might be for performance itself, not just your standard let's capture a visual effects shot like Golem or something like that as well. Often found that utilizing these sort of abstract forms and this sort of abstract experimentation allow me to gain deeper understandings of what we could do with the technology, test the limitations of it, and see what would work and what wouldn't work and all that sort of stuff as well. So we went on like this for a while. We did lots of motion capture. I got very adept at washing mocap suits, and there was a lot of spandex getting hung out at my home, and lots of questions from the neighbours about what sort of things do you need spandex for. We did lots of things with industry sort of stuff as well. We captured dogs, we captured creatures. We really tested the system here as well. We started doing lots of work with industry. This dog capture here was actually for Cutting Edge. We were doing a test for one of their short films that they were making, Axel, at the time, to see if capturing a dog was a more of a vital outcome than hand animating the dog. Okay, I think in the end they went with hand animation, but used the dog data as a bit of a reference point for everything that we're doing. But this was an intriguing thing, and also kind of started showing us down the path of realistically capturing or doing creature capture could be quite a possible thing at the time. So towards the end of 2018, we really started to sort of take shape into the current version of what we know as VP Studio at QUT. And it's one of these sort of happenstance things where we were at the tail end of a research infrastructure grant. It was quite a large grant, And we had some money we had to spend before the grant time ran out, and we gave back the money. I think this is a very common thing that everyone's used to inside a university where, hey, the grant is finishing, we've got some cash left over, what can we spend it on that will be beneficial to us? So at the time, we've been running lots of Icon. I basically ingrained myself as being the mocap person, the sort of technical person who could set up and run the system in the space here. And so I was running lots of classes here inside of our VP studio at the time, which wasn't really officially a VP studio. It was just a space that was set up each semester to run virtual production. Also now shout out to Jordan Turner here, who's one of my past students. He went on to Weta and then Nant Studios for a bit. And I believe now has come back to study as well. So, but he was another sort of student that came out of the mix and really wanted to do mocap and spent a year doing mocap in his final semester or final year of studies here, which really helped develop the studio as well. So at this point, it was one of these things where, because we had to spend this money, we're like, what should we get? What should we buy? And the grand idea of let's buy a giant LED wall, a modular system that we could use. We don't have one. It could be useful for installation work and other sort of things. So they spent the rest of the grant buying an LED wall. Now this is being a modular system, it means we can change the shape, we can build it, we can make it bigger. But you can see here at the back behind Jordan, this wonderful little screen, okay? And that's how our LED wall sort of started. We had multiple parts of it in a box, in multiple boxes off to the side here, but it was great for mocap sort of feedback and class demonstrations and that sort of stuff as well. But yeah, at this point, I said I've been running workshops and some classes in motion capture. And what started happening a lot was every time we put out a new QT ad, marketing team would come and go, hey, we want to do an ad about film and animation and creative practice and what's going on here. And we want to do, motion capture. We want to show mocap. It's a really cool thing. We want to show filming in the space. So it was one of these things where we started down this path, but the filming or the creation of the QT ads was a thing, a mechanism I leveraged and used, and other staff also used here to develop new capabilities as well. So, sort of 2018, towards the end of 2018, we wanted to film this new commercial, and we had this sort of test we'd done with Cutting Edge about using the backdrop to film on. The sort of whispers about in-camera visual effects had started from industry. There was notions about, hey, we could use an LED wall with a real-time background to film against. And so by nature, we had an LED wall, we had some backdrops, and we'd done a test with Cutting Edge and said, hey, this is quite viable. We might have something here. And this was sort of back before there was any how-to guides. We're effectively just running Unreal like it's on a giant monitor at this point, showing a virtual background, which is this wonderful jungle environment. So working with, I believe this was Stranger Films we worked with here to make the QT ad. Had Joyce here, one of our animation students, talking the ad and that sort of stuff. But we had this whole idea of like, let's show that, the subtext was that the real world isn't real. It was the matrix sort of line, basically. And so the idea would be that Joyce would come out of the bushes here inside the shot, and the camera panned back to show that, hey, this is a giant LED wall and this is a virtual world. And then we went on into the animation studio and all that sort of stuff. But even though we didn't have camera tracking at the time to create that parallax, this really said to us, hey, this is a thing. This is possible. We can do this. And this was, end of 2018 at this point. And so just before that sort of explosion of VP, we had sort of set up our base capability for this. Now, the start of 2021, 2020, 2019, there was something happened. We all kind of had a bit of time at home and had a bit of a rest for a bit. And then started 2021, sort of the end of 2020 there, we were back in the studio. And of course, happenstance, Mark Toy here was employed to film another QT ad. We want to put QT on the map here. At this point, the notion of in-camera visual effects was a thing. The Mandalorian had shown, hey, we can do this in a big way. And, sitting at home watching this come out, I went, we've got a giant LED wall. We've got a tracking system. We've got the capability to render on the wall and Unreal. We can do this. So we'd already kind of built all this foundational stuff up to this point, and leveraging all that experience of doing motion capture, real-time animation work, and those sort of preliminary tests inside of the studio here, filming against it, we set up this sort of basic tracking. I say me. This was me doing this one for the ad itself. So we had the notional idea of we need a tracked camera. We had already kind of discussed this with Cutting Edge at the time. It was trying to do a similar thing. Tracked camera. We need that vision on the wall. We need the vision of the camera on the wall to create parallax. Now, this is still before the how-to guide on how you do this from Unreal came out. And so I leveraged my experience of using motion capture. Well, we can track objects. So what if we 3D print a tracker, which we've got 3D printing capability here, 3D print it, stick some dots on it, stick it on top of the camera and track that. And then inside of Unreal, I'll parent that data or parent a camera to that incoming data. So you get your sort of tracked camera, which is great in theory. The thing that doesn't exist at this point is the ability to really filter that data and make it smooth and make it easier. We have no end display system, which allows us to map the wall properly. So I'm literally just running Unreal in the background here and showing the camera vision. So this was, the reason why I show this is the first time we actually did a tracked camera for filming at QUT. And we use the shots in this, but you can see when I hit play here, the tracking is not exactly pretty. It's very shaky, very wobbly. It gets nice for a second as you smooth it out. And this is the nature of how motion capture can work. It finds that vector and it works, okay? So, we have worked out that we could do in-camera visual effects via the camera lens. We have parallax. Obviously the shot here, we did use a little bit of the shot from the camera lens, but the shot was actually what Mark Toyer here was filming in terms of like the action inside the studio. But this was what I deemed sort of a pivotal moment in our studio production setup. And for me, developing VP at QUT, it really started us down this path of what we currently got. And because we had that legacy of being able to, develop the sort of foregrounding, shadow, and the ability to do this inside the studio here, it meant that we could jump into the space quite dramatically and quite quickly. So, we went on for a long time here still, and I know this is obscured by the Zoom stuff here, but 2021, we were still doing mocap. I was still running mocap, and I changed one of our units. We had a unit here called CGI Technology that I've been running for many years, and it was looking at real-time animation. I was able to change it and manipulate it to be a virtual production unit. So in that unit, the in-cam visual effects side of things was still very new and hadn't really been set up properly, so I wasn't subjecting students to that just yet. I wanted to evolve VP, motion capture side of things here, and apply all the sort of stuff that we've been doing in workshops inside of a class itself and run a whole class on it. And this was one student project here that we ran, which was amazing, okay? So Kevin Lyon, who will appear in some of these shots in spandex at some point, was one of my students. He's gone on to work for Logimas now, so if anyone's looking to buy a Vicon system, you'll deal with Kevin for a bit. But he was sort of the ringleader of getting a whole class of students to go, hey, let's make a short film in this space. And I'd already cued onto the fact from the workshops and working with students in this space, and those sort of pivotal students I've mentioned, about how we could go through and utilize what they were doing in class, let's get them there, what we're doing in class to evolve the capabilities of the technology. So I would start these classes by saying, hey, this is what we know we can do, social demos, and say, but there's things we can't do yet. There's things we don't know how to do yet. So let's experiment, let's try. It might not work, but we'll learn a lot by doing it. So realistically, this is the first time that we had a whole unit enabled to focus on a sort of VP technology here. I brought students along here for this sort of journey and ingrained them into this idea of like, help develop the capabilities here. This is new. Not a lot of people are doing this. Not a lot of information of how to do it. Let's work out how. So 2021 was quite a pivotal year, and that's sort of like, hey, we can do this outcome, and progressing on from there. Then we hit into the wonderful 2022 period here. Now, 2022 was a massive time period. I did a lot of stuff. At this point in time, since about 2019, I had been working with a couple of colleagues here to develop a new capstone experience at QUT. So our third year went from being individual capstone experiences inside of our majors, inside of our course, to being a single capstone experience that involves all our majors. Now, at QUT, and this is recently about to change for next year, but we would run a capstone experience that had all our 9 disciplines running in one spot. I helped develop that, and that gave me the ability to go, well, a project inside the space, let's call it the virtual production studio. Okay? By this point, we had set up some research projects. I had to rebuild the system for research using in-cam visual effects. Unreal had launched their how-to guide in this, which gave me the ability to solve some of the problems I was facing from that early 2021 tracking issues and that sort of stuff. And we were able to jump into 2022 with this project inside the third year, which was solely designed to build capability inside our VP studio. So I had a small collection of students work inside the project space with me, probably about 15 at the time. Kevin came back into this boat and was sort of like being the sort of leader of the student group in the studio here. But our mandate for this third year project was to develop capabilities, predominantly in-camera visual effects capabilities. So starting at start of 2022, kind of when we had no in-camera visual effects, by the end of 2022, we had achieved a lot. We had done the short film stuff with TUT. We had been able to achieve a stable in-camera visual effects setup here. And the studio was up and running. Okay? It was vastly sort of ahead of its time. And we were able to make outcomes that industry was doing at the same time. So there was this weird thing that happened in 2022. Anyone who was working inside the in-camera visual effects space seemed to be virtually burning things. So I had the wildfire story, which I mentioned at the start, then showed examples of. We had this Whiskey A Go-Go documentary going on, which is about a nightclub in Brisbane that burnt down. And so we were visually burning stuff quite a lot at this point. And I found that Dream Screen, who had launched into space, was also doing the same thing at this point. And I'd also found that there's lots of studios starting to pop up who were jumping into the space for the first time. But at this point, we'd effectively already been doing in-camera visual effects for a year. But the main thing here was leveraging that sort of legacy of experience in the space, bringing that experience that was sort of developed from experimentation, research, and some short workshop with students into a unit then that allowed us to sort of go, well, the idea of building capabilities using or with students, using this knowledge and experience that students have in the space was a thing. Let's do that third year and have a focused project, which solely designed around building this capability. The outcomes from this was one project would build capability, the other film projects would then use that capability in their shoots. So we can see down here, we've got multiple shoots. There's actually Dan down here, who's another great student of mine, doing all shoots in sort of like the first studio set up here. Okay. So to me, that was a really pivotal year. It was a lot of work. It really took a long time to get into space there. And I know we're bleeding on time here, so we'll quickly get into the sort of the current versions that we're running with. So end of 2022, we ran into this thing where it's like we couldn't bring a car in the studio. Doing travel simulation, where you simulate driving down highways or streets or locations, is a thing. And it's a thing that allows us to, or lends itself to VP and in-camera visual effects dramatically, because you can set this up in a safe environment and off we go. So between 2022 and 2023, we moved the studio into its new version across the road from where I'm sitting right now to the block. It's a building called the Block, and it became our VP studio. The main reason was it's a bigger space, but realistically, we could drive a car into it. So it gives us the ability to bring a car in and do a whole new thing. So in 2023, we did a lot of travel simulations, but it really started to evolve the studio. We upped our technical capabilities in the space. We kind of refined some of the issues we had in the other space of sort of vibrations affecting tracking and all that sort of stuff. But the thing we realized from 2022 was that for students, apart from leveraging their projects in the space to help build capabilities and finesse them in better workflows, that sort of goal in the space, we could actually allow them to now film things that are inherently dangerous. Okay, so driving down a highway at high speed with rain is something that they would never get risk approval to film. It's just not feasible for a student project. It's too risky, it's costly. Even for a proper feature film project, there's lots of risk if you were to drive down a street with that much rain and water and try and film it. So filming inside a firestorm is one thing they can't do, but we're able to achieve it in VP. Filming travel sim, driving inside of cars for their projects is something else that they're not able to do for their student projects, but we could achieve this now inside of in-camera visual effects. So, you know, these student projects, these third year projects, they helped evolve these sort of capabilities around the space, both in a technical sense, but also a creative sense. We'd learnt a lot by this point of what we could do in in-camera visual effects and what you can't do in in-camera visual effects easily. The issues, the trial and error, the things that are hard, the things that are easy. And so we could give students this experience in the space here. I do want to also mention music videos. We started doing lots of music videos in the space because they're that experimental abstract form of filmmaking. We could get away with a lot of what ifs, how-tos, what if we do this sort of stuff as well. 23 to 24, we also started doing lots of collaboration with industry partners. One to mention here was with Queensland Museum and Davo here. So Davo was a shared staffing between Queensland Museum and us. And we wanted to do this thing to show Queensland Museum what VP could be used for in the space. So in the background, I'll be doing lots of work with mocapping dinosaurs. So we thought, let's mocap a dinosaur, put it inside the VP space, film it, and film a bit of like our how-to guide for the museum. This is content that was done with students, and students made the content, and it was used then, or is used currently by Queensland Museum when they apply for grants, utilising this sort of technology in the space here. So that was sort of the process. Obviously, there's 2024, there's 2025, there's been some changes in there, and I don't actually have a slide on it, but I will just mention that sort of 2024, we continued down this fashion where we did lots and lots of more VP stuff, more motion capture stuff. We kind of cemented and evolved it. Started 2025, I was at the point in the studio where I'm saying that in-camera visual effects is kind of up and running. I deem it as up and running, but the missing component was technical support. And so halfway through this year, in 2025, we were actually able to employ a VP technician for the first time. Up until that point, it was just me. I was running as the academic and the technician in the space, which gave me lots of ability to update and change and drag students along for that journey as well. But it wasn't until this year that we actually employed a proper VP technologist in the space, which allowed us to sort of evolve further and me to more focus back onto the motion capture scene. But obviously part of this is like, that was what happened. And that's a nutshell of what happened. I utilized that sort of ability of students and their beautiful minds there to help develop the capabilities, but also meant that these students got a wonderful experience and put them at the top of the game in terms of industry. They would walk out from industry knowing more than what the industry does. Walk out to industry, sorry, knowing more than what the industry does about VP technologies in here. But some wonderful statistics, and I did maps on this, which is interesting, and I have just done an update, but I haven't updated these ones. Over that sort of 2021 to 2024, halfway through 2024, there was a collection of about 700 students that walked into our VP space and had an experience. Now, keep in mind that some of these students, they're part of the film crew. Our third-year film crews are anywhere from 5 to 30 students in one hit in that space, but they all get an experience of shooting in that space. And also my VP unit at the time had grown to being 80 plus students per semester, and so there's lots of experience in motion capture in camera visual effects. My more recent count, which I only just did last night, but I haven't had time to update this graphs, is we're pushing 900 now across the board in the VP studio. The other thing I was tracking was also how are different disciplines. Inside of creative arts here, we have film, animation, dance, acting, drama, technical production, music, creative writing, and visual arts. And we also have game students who exist in another course outside of our course. They work with our animation students. So between these disciplines, they all kind of exist inside the VP space. And yeah, we're able to give students this sort of massive experience here. And when I sort of first set up these student numbers, I went, wow, that's staggering. How many students have actually got this experience in such a short time frame there? And also that sort of bring together of the multiple students here as well. So just some numbers, because everyone loves numbers, about what actually went through. It wasn't just small groups, some of them quite big groups. And I believe it's had a massive impact across the board here. So to really sort of finalise this off, I know we're kind of bleeding on time a little bit here. So the core philosophy I went through was that sort of grounded in my teaching practice as well. Okay, so constructive learning approaches, practice-led learning approach, students as active participants in the environment. A lot of sort of times in the early days of in-camera visual effects and virtual production, a lot of places would show students what this is, but never let them use it. My whole goal here was to literally sit people down at the computers, at the cameras, in the spandex, activate the studio themselves, okay? They got hands-on experience of doing this. Obviously there was like, oh, what if we break it? And I would say to my students, if you're breaking it, you're learning something, so go for it. In a commercial studio, you'd be hell-bent scared of them breaking the studio. This time, I want them to try and push the limits, try and do it. And this was sort of bled out of my teaching, but my experience of running workshops inside the space and having students get that hands-on experience. And to me, this is the key thing. If you're setting up and running a VP studio, both for teaching, but also research, hands-on experience is the go-to. If students just sit there and watch this, they don't get that experience. Having them sit down and man these components, do it, actually have that physical lived experience, And then asking, hey, what if we did this, or what if we did that, is beautiful. And that's the thing that they get the most out of. But also it was the thing I was able to leverage to develop our capabilities. Because I would say to students that there's a lot of unknowns here. If you've got an idea, let's test it, let's explore it. And so there was lots of ideas that came out of working with these students that developed the capability, refined the capability, that gave them this beautiful experience that they could never get, outside of this place effectively at that point in time. So I've already kind of touched on some of this, but involvement, ownership, of course, students to shape the outcomes that were in the space. Basically, we got to the point in the third year where I would have key people in the studio who had done the experience in the first semester. The second semester, they would come in, and I'd basically throw them the keys to the studio and go, have fun. And they would set up and run the entire shoots themselves, or the entire experience themselves. Obviously, the alignment with curriculum, with industry practices and tools and what was going on in industry was very big. Because we already had all this technology when in-cam visual effects was a thing, and able to jump in very early and solve some of these problems, I had a constant dialogue with industry. They would ask what's going on, what if we did this, have you tried this? And I'll go yes and no, and I'd ask them what they were doing, what was going on, some of the issues and problems they were facing. And so this constant dialogue with industry and what they were facing, and with other universities at the time as well, was gold. Okay, it meant that we could have this sort of robust nature. And like I mentioned before, students leaving their studies here with very lived hands-on experience, which made them highly sought after in the explosion that currently is virtual production. And as I said before, that practical application is a key thing here, of course, as well. Another key thing to mention is the cross-disciplinary nature of VP. To achieve an in-camera visual effects shot, you need everyone on set. You need everyone that you normally have in post-production and pre-production on set to achieve the outcome. So it meant it became a highly collaborative cross-disciplinary space where we would have all those 9 to 10 disciplines existing in the space, all working collectively. And obviously this brings problems. You've got filmmakers speaking with animators and game artists for the first time. And there's a lot of, what does that mean in this term? But it meant that we could all sort of focus on these creative outcomes, which was wonderful. And it really bred the VP Studio as a living laboratory. It was a thing that would evolve every time a project went there. It changed and evolved, and the capabilities would evolve at the same time. So this was sort of the key thing in terms of how to implement a VP Studio, is going through these things in sort of a teaching and learning space itself. Obviously, like I mentioned before, the direct connection with industry is a very vital thing. And as this has really become really quite mainstream these days, there's a lot of industry that engage in the space and jump into the space to really understand it. But yeah, implementing, I cannot stress enough, a lot of universities I speak to, they want to implement this as a research device, which is wonderful, but I would highly recommend you do both, research and teaching and learning. Our studio is still 95% to 90% teaching and learning practice over industry or research work as well. So we kind of hold into that because it's been quite a vital thing for us. So yes, new forms of VP storytelling. What does VP and pedagogy potential, what's the potential of this space? What can happen in here? New forms of storytelling is a big thing. Having students experience these new elements and what we can do. That ability to support cross-disciplinary creativity, interaction, new ways of making things, but that connection that an animation student might make with a film student or dance student or an acting student, and those sort of cross-disciplinary, having to explain what they do to each other and working out how they work with each other is amazing. The thing I really like about having a VP studio and running this and setting this up is it encourages risk-taking. Okay? Students would never before think they could shoot in a firestorm or drive into travel sim, but also creative risks. Okay, the what-if questions can be tested, examined, and see what they look like. There's no fear of will this shot work? We can actually do this and see what happens. It activates practice-based learning. Okay, learning students by doing. It's one of these things where having students in the space, it ingrains them in this sort of deeper research mentality that us as university practitioners like to work with. It's not just about making it, but the critical analysis of how and why. Obviously, the industry relevance, this is the potential of having VP. It's making sure your students and your research is very relevant to what's going on at the time. The other big thing here is that scaffolding of innovation. Okay? So the idea of having each cohort or each group that came in here, each project builds upon the last project's outcomes. This has been a big thing, and the potential of using VP in the space allows us to do this. Obviously, the fostering of employability and adaptability in this rapidly evolving industry. I've had lots of students who spent a year doing in-cam visual effects or motion capture, and they've gone directly to an industry partner of ours, working with them, employed full-time, but they're not doing VP. They're doing more real-time applications and solving technical problems, but they're leveraging that ability and experience they have of having to build the capability to solve issues that came up in the studio in a different way. So, you know, just because they do VP in the studio doesn't mean that's the only option for them. I do want to briefly touch on some institutional challenges because, you know, we all work in universities here and we know it's not the easiest thing. Obviously starting this off in a very early sense, and I have glossed over some of the really challenges that we kind of faced in the early days there, but, you know, working inside of an industry, I mean, QUT's network was very fun. We have lots of security issues, and a lot of the setup inside of VP Studio requires you to handle networking, okay? And we're talking IT networking here. So there was a lot of sort of IT issues we had to overcome to make this work. There's also lots of, in the early days of doing this, people not knowing what it is, trying to explain the capabilities and what can happen here. And getting support for it was actually quite hard in the early days, both from a sort of technology way, but also from sort of the pedagogy and institutional way. In those early days, there was a bit of like, oh, is this really none of your work? Is this really useful? It wasn't really till the last sort of 5 or 6 years that there's been overwhelming sort of support for this, and it's become the main focus of the school's sort of next leg of development here has been the VP space here. The biggest institutional challenge I kind of faced here was the lack of sort of technical ability. We have a wonderful technical team and always have, but this as such a new thing, trying to find a technician that could support the VP space was very hard because they effectively didn't exist because what we were doing was only just what the industry was doing. So I fell into this sort of area where I was the technical person, but also the academic, which meant I had to do lots of double handling. This sets up a bit of a limitation as we got into the 2023, 2024 era of our studio, where I kind of created a beast of VP want and need, and it was rapidly running away from me. My workload, my time that I was allowed in the studio, let alone my personal time I would commit to this, was quite small in comparison to the needs. But finding someone who had the right sort of technical experience to support this space was very hard. And it only really happened, like I said, this year, where we employed John Wayne, who actually built a studio here commercially in Brisbane here as well. And that studio was the same workflow we had. So that studio was sort of restructuring and changing, and John was looking for his next thing. And we were able to offer him a technical role here as a professional staff member to come on board and sort of take over the running of the technology side of the studio, which has been wonderful for this, which means now I can actually get back to the research and more advancement side of it. So yeah, that's been sort of the sort of journey. I do want to briefly mention where we're going to now. Went too far. At this point, this is sort of like version 2 of our studio. Because we've had this technology for a while, it's aging. We need a new LED wall. We need a new Vicon system. Where a lot of universities and studios are buying these things for the first time setting up, we're at the tail end of doing a version 3. We're about to get bigger and newer LED wall. We're replacing our mocap system with an updated model. We've got new lights coming. We've got new render boxes coming to handle better render capability. We already have facial capture like Faceware tech for facial capture, StretchSense gloves for hands for capture as well. Effectively, we're going down version 2 or version 3, of our studio, which will up our technical capability. But with technical capabilities comes problems and more technical support. It's only been able to achieve now because we've been able to employ a tech in the space. Also, just want to point out that obviously we've done a lot of talk about film and animation, you know, VP in that space, but VP is just not for that space as well, okay? There's lots we can do in the performing arts area, and this is a big push for us next. We're going down the path of what can this VP studio do in terms of a live show, in terms of a live production for our performing arts students and staff to experiment as well. This was just a demo we did, and also for one of my classes where we'd have dance students come in and, you know, use their beautiful movement talents in a VP sense, but in a very abstract and performative sense as well here. The thing about doing this is, especially in motion capture, it's hard because you have to put some in the spandex. So we've been one of the first people to buy Vicon's new markerless capture system. And we should hopefully have that up running next year. I think we're the first in Asia Pacific to possibly receive one of them, which means that you don't need spandex and dots. You can walk in, T-pose, and you're captured, and it does really good job. So this will change our ability to do live performance work, and also in the classroom, where I could now put 23 students into mocap inside a single session without the time delay of putting them inside of spandex. Okay. We'll skip past this one. This was a more recent sort of performing arts sort of outcome where we have performing arts students manipulate sort of things in real time and make live performances in this space. But given the time, I do want to jump on to questions. I hope that made sense. It's a bit of a rapid fire thing, but if there is questions, please ask. I would love to answer any questions. Obviously, have a bit of a discussion. More than happy to stay for as long as we need to on this one. But thank you for listening. Anything that needs clarifying, please ask.
Wow, Paul, that's amazing. Your setup is incredible. Your students are very lucky to have you and that setup, that's for sure. Okay, we do have a couple of questions. If anyone doesn't mind staying around for a little bit. So I'll get some people to ask you the questions if that's okay, Paul.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, we have Paul Oliveira says it looks like a whole lot of fun, and I agree 100% with that.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I don't have a name, but I have an A number. I think you're from University of Adelaide. Does Paul have a rough cost set up for his current studio and its current form?
always get this. So, I mean, in the early days, so our Vicon system was about $1 million. Our wall was about $500,000. That's before you add infrastructure and so three-phase power to run the wall. Computer systems, our render node was about $40,000. We have another couple of computers which are sort of control mechanisms, and they were $5,000 and $6,000 each. But these change, of course. You can do it quite cheaply. You can do it quite expensively, depending on what you want to do. The thing about it is you can do this with in-camera visual effects with green screen, which is a low cost, quite a simple solution. I was recently at UNSW for a teaching fellowship there, and their first foray into this is in the green screen space. Because we already had an LED wall, I was able to jump that green screen and go straight to LED wall. Okay? It really depends on the size and scope of what you're looking to do. Funding, there's lots of variables that play this. You could easily spend anywhere from, a couple of thousand to tens of millions on these sort of spaces. So it is kind of how long's a piece of string in some cases. But if you want to replicate what we've got here, collectively, we're probably talking at least $1 million to $2 million. But a lot of that is tracking hardware. Because we do a big lot of mocap, we focus on quite high quality tracking. You can do low cost tracking. You can use a Vive Mars, which is about $10,000. I think the purchase is set up. The thing about going cheaper is you do end up with some, I suppose, technical issues around tracking. So some limitations. But my thing is, if doing the couple of $1,000 setup gets you in the game and gets you started, and that's all you can do, 100% do it. Okay. The more important thing here is getting in and trying and getting started, proving the capabilities and going from there. I've since gone back and done some green screen work, done some desktop table work using in-camera visual effects, and it's great. It's fun. It's accessible for students as well. It's something they can actually achieve at home using iPhones and a relatively cheap computer and a TV if they wanted to. But yes, I mean, if you want, send me an email. We can have a deeper conversation about precisely what you're sort of after in that space. But yeah, hopefully, I know it's a bit of a non-answer, but there is a variation of depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Thanks very much, Paul. Greg Dorian, are you there to ask the next question?
I am. My question was just around, so you showed us a fair few of the kind of virtual backgrounds that you're running out of your Unreal Engine. Did you and your team actually build those virtual environments?
Yeah. So the sort of VP art department, I would say, is the Achilles heel of doing all the in-camera visual effects work. So, it's shifting that post-production creation to pre-production. So now you have to have that environment made and ready to go. The delay on doing that is detrimental. The time frame to do that is massive in some cases. So for a lot of our backdrops, we have sourced content, and all this content has been sourced content that Epic has put out for free or that we've purchased in a professional sense. A lot of that content we've then manipulated and adjusted to our needs. And I think that's the power of the real-time side of things, is that, so, anyone who's done EVP stuff or Unreal stuff will recognize the Australian Outback environment. That's what we use for the wildfire shoot here and multiple other things in here. It was a free thing. It was put up as part of the VP package. It's widely used. It's great content, but we've manipulated that a lot. So a lot of our student shoots start off with, what do you want to make? Okay, can we source and find something that is similar or useful in that background, or collection of assets that we can get, and then build that background in there. And that was predominantly to overcome that sort of time delay of building that background. We do have, inside the animation degree, we teach a lot of Unreal. So I do have students who can build those environments, but the labor intensive nature of that can hinder a VP shoot. So yes, for a lot of our stuff, we would source this, but then spend time in our studio manipulating it and getting it right for the shot. There has been a couple of completely custom built setups, which I honestly don't have footage of in here itself, but they've been quite smaller, more unique things in the space here. Yep.
Thanks very much, Paul. Question from Mitch Buzzer. Are you there, Mitch?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks for the presentation. Really interesting stuff. I don't actually know how this question came into my mind, but I'm going to ask it.
Go for it.
So I'm just curious because the actors, the dancers, when they're doing the kind of motion capture stuff, they're obviously relating to each other, in a real space. But I'm wondering if anyone's experimented with the actors being inside the virtual space and if that changes their performance at all, or I don't know. I think you can see where my question is heading.
Yes, yeah, no, definitely. It's been the big sort of driving factor for us, is that sort of visual feedback, both from the virtual and both from the physical into the virtual, that sort of dynamic where not only the physical actors can see what they're doing and see what they're puppeting and then adjust their performance for it. But yeah, having a virtual entity that then manipulates back, yes. We've done some testing experiments into this space where we've had a virtual dinosaur running around the background and we've had physical actors responding to that virtual dinosaur. So one of the ones we tried for our Brisbane International Film Festival demo was we'd have a driving simulation, he'd get out, obviously we ripped off Jurassic Park for this, and he'd get out and there'd be this dinosaur stalking him around there. And I mean, yes, at the time we did actually have that dinosaur mocapped live. That was one version. We've also done a thing where we have a group come in, they are the tour group, and then they respond to the virtual stimulus of, say, a dinosaur fence is broken down, there's a T-Rex roar that occurs, and dinosaurs run through the scene and they go, run off and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think this is one of the big powerful things about having that sort of real-time interaction and seeing where you're existing, what's going on. It's not just a green screen with a tennis ball. You can respond to this. As an actor in the space, 100%. You get such a better performance. You get that eye line contact you're after. The tricky thing about this, of course, is at the end of the day, it is still a flat wall. It's a giant TV. So having that virtual entity appear on the same plane as the physical entity, I think is a very interesting research field. And if that can be cracked, that's a big thing, especially cracked at a high fidelity where you can have your Star Wars character interacting with your physical character and they look like they're on the same plane existence and they look like they're interacting with each other. We've done some tests trying to see how far we can push that. And yeah, you've got to be very careful. Once they cross that sort of dimensional plane, it starts breaking down. But if they're in the backdrop and the performer's reacting to that, it's gold. One of the things we've messed around with was obviously having like Godzilla attack a city, having people respond to that, but also having that horror trope where the person's in the front and they're kind of like, what's going on? And behind them, the screech goes through the scene. What was that? Because we have sort of like a vision for them, they can see what's going on from the camera. They can kind of respond to that in a more accurate sense. So we get that timing. And the beautiful thing is we can use then the same creature that the visual effects artists would use in post-production to do a more advanced, maybe the creature now comes out of the bush and runs after the character or something like that as well. The closest we've come is using a bit of stereo. So the stereoscopic glasses that you can find at movie theaters, where you get that three-dimensional effect. Because our LED wall is big enough that we can kind of lose your perception, depth perception in that, we've done some experiments where we run sort of that stereoscopic vision on the wall, being in the space, and it has the feeling of content coming over the top of you, and it looks amazing. Our next sort of goal on that would be, can we do this in the camera lens? Can we have that stereo 3D nature inside a camera lens in there? We've also used Unreal Engine's live compositing capability to put virtual content on top of physical actors and physical content. It's very hard because your lighting is very hard to match at that point. But I do think it's the next sort of frontier for in-camera visual effects is kind of having that double manipulation occurring. So yeah, hopefully that's what you mean.
Thanks very much, Paul, for those responses. That was great. And your setup is incredible. You're obviously doing some amazing work, and I think your students are obviously the beneficiaries of that. And so congratulations, you're really leading the way there. Okay, thanks very much for today, everybody, and thanks again to Paul van Opdenbosch. Really appreciate your time this morning, Paul, and we'd like to catch up with you again, maybe in a couple of years, and see what other amazing things you've achieved. So that'd be fantastic.
And thank you for the offer as well. It's been a privilege. And I just want to say, anyone who's here and has further questions, feel free to email me. Stuart can obviously pass on an email if you want. I don't mind having questions come in. Of course, let me know. I'm more than happy to have conversations, especially if you're looking at jumping into the space or have jumped into the space. I'd love to compare battle wounds and notes if anyone's got anything going on. My sort of last segue here is after I've been doing this for a bit, I met the boys from Flinders University who had been on that sort of trajectory at the same time. So Cameron and Jason there, I found out about a year or so after doing the hard pain and suffering part of this, they've been doing the same thing. We've kind of been pseudo-developing at the same time. And the funny thing is we had exactly the same issues. We didn't tackle exactly the same problems. And we are starting to experience the same things. We went about it in very different ways because they have technical, so Cameron's the technician in the space, Jason's the academic. I was kind of both of them in one. So it was a very different experience of how this was. And our studios are set up in different mechanisms side of our university systems. But yeah, if anyone's set one of these up or is setting one of these up or looking to, I'd love to have a conversation with you as well, a deeper sort of chat. So.
Thanks so much, Paul. I'll send out the link to the recording of this later, and I'll CC you in, Paul, so everybody will get your email. So
no trouble.
Be careful what you wish for.
All good, all good. And of course, if anyone's in Brisbane, hit us up. More than happy to do a show and tell. So
thank you so much, Paul, and thanks everybody for your time today, and have a fantastic day. Thank you.